let me get into a little bit of what we're going to talk about specifically today, and it all starts. There's two parts. First of all, we're going to do a quick overview of the results of some of the insights of the survey that we presented back at the summit, and there'll be lots to cover, and there'll be a full report of all the information we're going to talk about that we'll get out in the next week or so. We're just waiting on some final edits and changes, but so you'll have a full sort of accounting of all those insights. In addition, we're gonna actually Gwen's gonna, after we go through the survey, with that context of a focus on ethics, we want to look at the changing nature of data governance. So get into more specifically, how do you actually start to put controls in place around this and start thinking about that space? So that should also be a good set of content that we'll dialogue on. So back to the survey. So some months ago, you know, as Omar highlighted, working with Pertucia, we said, you know, Gen AI is very relevant to high tech, and specifically, you know, there's potential for, you know, increased levels of bias can be brought into the work with AI, and so we need to have really a substantial discussion on this topic of AI and data ethics. And so we set out to survey the high tech members, and we said, you know, it's a great way to sort of leverage the power of the high tech community, share practices, points of view, give people ideas if they haven't really jumped into that space yet. So it's where to start, how to start thinking about it. So that's what we have. We got hundreds of responses back from you all at a variety of levels, and so with that said, let's dig in. And before so why don't we start with the first page there. But before I debrief some of this content, let me just address some of the labels out there. I mean, AI and data ethics, you hear responsible AI, you hear trusted AI. There's 3 or 4 different names for what we're talking about here. But I think for purposes of today, just, you know, there may be some nuances between those, but just treat them all as the same. Because they're fundamentally about, you know, how we're taking a principle-based approach to having more ethical outcomes around the use of our data and AI tools. So now, with respect to the first set of insights, well, you know, no matter what terms we use, it's clear that the ethical part of AI and data use is really important and matters to the high tech base. Nearly 70% of the respondents were concerned about bias, not only in the broader economy, but about the same percentage were concerned about AI and its potential to create negative impacts for their organization. So when we look at what's concerning them around, you know, the use of AI and data, front and center are things like, you know, the more traditional risk drivers like regulation and market disruption. Those are some big competitive risks that they're worried about, but they're also worried about intellectual property. And you can see farther down the chain here, they're worried about reputation, broader market reputation, and customer and employee impacts as well. So AI, where you have some of this risk in the system, it can serve to really magnify the impact of some of those drivers, given the scope and scale that accompany the use of some of those tools. So if we go to the next slide. And so if we focus less about, you know, some of the concerns, more ethical concerns around the use of that, if we just look at Gen AI in particular and how people are using Gen AI, that really falls into 3 groups. And you can see that on the left-hand side. There's those, about 16%, are really allowing unrestricted use. These are the people that are really jumping in with both feet. They're really doing a lot of experiments. And then the majority, really, as of today, about 74% are really dipping their toe in they're doing some experimentation, but it's a much lighter usage. As we looked at the results, and a very small minority are really hanging back on the sidelines, not doing a lot of implementation around this, but really looking to see how this is evolving. But regardless of the viewing, how they view the opportunity, they're also keenly aware of the Gen AI specific risks. And the top of mind there, you can see, is really privacy violations, the undetected bias. You know, the use of Gen AI is a function of garbage in, garbage out. So, you know, it can have inherent bias in some of the perspectives that are integrated or outcomes of some of the prompts. And so, you know, that's top of mind. I think that obviously the reliability, the fact there is potential for, you know, bad quality outcomes and in some cases hallucination. That was top of mind. And then, you know, the fact that it is a black box at some level. You can't always attribute sources, and there's also some concerns about IP and how that gets managed as more of us adopt large language models into our environments. So if we continue, so as we look at getting established and how organizations are starting to dig into and putting structure around the adoption of Gen AI, there was really the senior executives that we got feedback from. There was really a sense that there was a high degree of personal involvement and learning. They were spending tens of hours, many more than 20 in some cases, focused on really understanding Gen AI at its core, understanding, you know, how the organization could be benefited or be impacted by that. And as a result, about half, you know, of the senior executives really were messaging the need to have an ethical and responsible approach across their organization. So that was really healthy to see that people are not experimenting first and then talking about the implications. The sense we got from the survey is people are recognizing this as a problem much earlier and incorporating that into their communications. And about 70%, 68, really have it starting to establish a dedicated team focused on ethical or responsible AI. So again, there was the number of people in those teams varies obviously across the spectrum, but just the fact that people are starting to invest and put dedicated resources, I think, is very, very positive. Organizations are out there, but it's still very early days. We go to the next one. So as we continue to look at how they're getting established, a big place they're starting is data governance and really setting clear standards. And so we can see that about half the organizations are in a pretty good place around getting started in this space. So they're setting policy, they're defining terms, they're developing guardrails and principles around the use. And these three aspects of AI governance are really critical first steps to create common objectives for responsible AI use. And you can see even a number of organizations are also taking those guiding principles and they're packaging them up, they're making them clear, and they're publishing them so that customers, vendors, and employees understand how the organization is approaching the responsible use of AI and its data. And so I see there's a hand up. Do we want to grab a question or wait to the end, Omar?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. Now, I think the slide that we're seeing is one about executive level frameworks help drive activation. Are you looking at your definition, guidelines, principles, policy slide?
We're looking at setting clear standards, Gwen. So can you back it up, or you're on mute?
I said I am on that slide. So So let me try to unshare and share again. I'm not on this slide that you guys are seeing. I'm on a different slide. So hang on.
Sorry, there's must be a challenge with the connection. I appreciate you guys bringing that up. Okay, so I can see. There's just a delay, Gwen.
I'm not sure what's happening.
Raylene, do you have the
If it's
presentation?
helpful, I do have the deck I can share. I have it. I've received
Okay.
it from Gwen.
Okay, great. Maybe that will be better. Well, let me just continue and, we'll catch up. But, the slide you were on is a really important slide. But, where I want to go first. So in addition to getting standards and guidelines and whatnot in place, the next thing we wanted to look at was really the first step in really activating this stuff and getting it ingrained in the organization was to look at training programs. And so we did that, and we found that about 67% of organizations. Yep, go to the next one, Arlene.
Okay.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
And no. Yep, it's good. That's good.
Good.
So
Okay.
about 67%, we're have some type of AI-based risk training involved. Not necessarily ethical sense of it, but just things you need to be aware of. So a lot of awareness training. On the ethics side, we see that about 80% have general ethics training, which given a lot of this stuff's been around for years, and depending on the industry, different levels of intensity. So not surprising you have such a high number there, but only about 30% have actually augmented that general ethics training to include AI. So that there's lots of room to grow there. And even smaller still, about 20%, 25%, are just building, not just building awareness, but actually leveraging an ethical framework or a set of ethical principles to be more consistent and improve activation. So that 27% is really important. And why is that? Well, if you've got a framework around this, you've got the ability to define scope and boundaries and take really what can be an abstract problem and provide a very clear focus. And that also helps create standardization and really a common language that helps you drive consistent levels of literacy in your organization. And so then you can start to consistently apply it to a variety of business processes like strategic decision making, all your technology assessments, data curation, and the like. So if you can go to the next slide. So where did that take us? Well, essentially, if we dig deeper into the importance of frameworks, you can kind of see that first of all, there are many different types of frameworks around, but for the most part, they consist of about 7 to 10 common principles. So things like, you can see those on the screen: accountability, fairness, explainability, reliability, privacy, and the like. And there's security and a few others that even sustainability. In some cases, people are using that. And these principles are important for a couple of reasons. One, they're based in NIST for the most part, and from a standards organization perspective, and a lot of the pending regulation is linked to these types of principles. So having clear guidance for the organization, a framework based on these, is really important, and they give people something concrete to action, right? And otherwise it can be very amorphous and a very, very big scope and confusing for folks. So you can get your own definitions around what each of these mean. But as a result, if you have that in place, you start incorporating that into your training, your literacy, your control processes, organizations were 3 to 4 times higher to actually activate and get people using and applying these ethical principles. So I guess the whole point is with this, it is, if you don't have this in place already, this is a really great place to start. And so we can go to the next slide. And so, you know, just in wrap, when we talk about the survey, we wanted to take a look at where people are also investing. So, you know, we could see what people are doing, but where's the next year? What are people focused on? And you know, not surprisingly, the traditional sources of investment were front and center. So, you know, things like privacy, things like integrity and data quality, those were top among where people are investing. But you did start to see things like safety and, you know, explainability and fairness start to play a role. And so I think that's really positive as people are shifting gears to start investing in these new areas. You know, what was interesting was accountability was actually kind of back of the bus in terms of some of these other areas of focus. And, you know, I think we think that's a big opportunity space for folks, because if you can focus on accountability and getting people clear on what they're responsible for, you can actually insulate your organization from some of those risks that we talked about. But that requires quite a bit of literacy. So it may be early days before that really takes hold. Okay, so just a bit of a whirlwind around a bunch of numbers, but you know, in recap, let me just go to the next slide. Just a quick recap here. So the high-tech community is clearly using AI and Gen AI in large numbers, you know, and as they do that, you know, recognizing the risk of negative impacts and increased bias, you know, they see making AI and data ethics is, you know, an essential element of managing the risk. And you also see executives taking action to address that risk, learning, messaging, dedicating resources, setting standards, setting policies, and really that the greatest impacts to getting activation of these ethical principles into the organization was through establishing and messaging and training around a common language and the ethical frameworks. So with that said, just if you can go to the next slide, and with that, just a reminder, the full report of all of this will be available very, very shortly. And with that context in AI and data ethics, let me turn over to Gwen. She can further dive into sort of the changing nature of data governance and how we think about controls and processes in this space.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. You know, I wanted to take a minute before we dive into the second set of slides to thank Omar. Omar, thank you and the high-tech community for being so gracious and allowing us to partner with you all in this survey. The results that have come out of this there's some really great insights into how organizations that the high-tech members represent and how they're thinking about and managing the implementation of ethics into their AI, responsible AI program. So I'm really thankful that we can participate and be in this journey with you. So it's great. Thank you. And as we can see from the survey results, frameworks, standards, policies, guidelines, all of those things are essential to activating ethics in the responsible AI program. The actual activity of developing the framework is important, and it sets the tone for the importance of ethics in the organization. So the tone comes from the top when you develop those things first. But a framework does a few important things, and I just want to reiterate those. It defines scope and bounds abstract problems, so it provides a clear focus. It creates standardization, common language that enables literacy, so everyone's talking about the same thing and has the same definitions for these abstract kind of problems that we're dealing with. And importantly, they also provide a consistent method. And even more importantly than the method is those objectives for the business processes like strategic decision-making, technology assessment, and data governance. So if you don't have an AI and data ethics framework that's the first place to start. If you do have one, then it's a great platform to launch into the activation of your responsible AI. So next slide. Yep. So all AI and analytics solutions have three components: algorithms, and sometimes algorithms now are embedded in technologies, AI technologies. There's tools and data. And AI and data ethics needs to be activated in all three of those components. Algorithms, like I said, can be embedded in AI technologies, but they learn, they process and analyze data to make predictions and make suggestions. And algorithms have always been kind of in the forefront of enterprises of managing AI, and organizations often have a well-established and rigorous training and testing program for their algorithms, and they feel very confident about those controls that are in place. Tools, different than AI technologies, but standard tools that we use, and they're often used to enable ethical principles like securing the algorithms at the endpoints or helping to prepare data for the model training. Those tools also, the ethical angle on those is to make sure that the tools used, they're secure, they're reliable, they're transparent, they're explainable, so we can understand what those tools are doing. And this is also a practice where organizations have a really great start on that. They're kind of standard and embedded. And the last component is data. And data is the common denominator here. Data is the raw material in the entire process. It's the lifeblood of AI. And if that wasn't a big enough challenge to say data is the lifeblood of AI, it's compounded now in the data estate with this rapid change that's happening. It's making traditional data governance practices insufficient to keep pace with the changes in AI. And even though organizations have well-established data governance practices, many, to remain competitive, there's going to have to be changes to the practices. They need to transform to be able to support this rapid change in the data estate. So, next slide. Yeah. So what are the changes in the data estate? They're happening in kind of three different pillars within the data estate. They're happening with data itself, they're happening around the use of data, and they're also happening around the business's expectations and outcomes of how that data is being used and what the expected outcome is. So data, there's still traditional data types and data governance requirements that are well known, and we can't neglect those. We need to manage those. So internal operational data, customer data, they're all well-known data types. We need to continue to govern those as we do properly to maintain quality, confidentiality, and privacy, and many other things. So, but some of the data that we used to be familiar with and know is changing. So methods, standards, practices, kind of those organizational intellectual property data is being thought of differently. It's being thought of as information, and it's being thought that it may have this kind of latent value across the entire enterprise. The way we look at sourced third-party data is also changing. It's proliferating, and not just proliferating, but there's a huge variety now of third-party data that we didn't used to have. And that variation and variety and proliferation of data is making it more and more valuable to be part of the data estate. And it can create a competitive advantage for an enterprise. So it's an important new way of looking at kind of data that we're familiar with. And then the last thing is this quickly emerging new data types like prompts and corpus, or corpora is the plural of that. And if you're not familiar with that term, a corpus is a collection of documents or text. It's data essentially, but it's unstructured data typically that is curated for machine learning. So think ChatGPT and all of the data that was collected from the internet from 2020 and then into the past. All of that data, unstructured text, documents, that sort of thing is what we would call the corpus or the knowledge base of ChatGPT. So that's what we mean by that. Prompts are the way that we interact with technologies like ChatGPT, and organizations are experimenting with prompts, and they're trying to standardize those prompts that produce reliable results, because because that's one of the problems that we have with some of the new AI technologies is they're not very reliable. And when we look at our ethical principles, that's something that we need to stabilize. So, so companies are looking at experimenting with those, standardizing those. They're doing the same sort of thing with intelligent agents. Those are going through the same sort of standardization process. So, input to AI technologies like the corporeal prompts need to be well understood and transparent. So as those emerge, there's some work that needs to be done around those. And then there's synthetic data. Synthetic data is statistically generated, hopefully, to augment kind of existing data assets. And they do that for a couple of different reasons. It can be used to address bias and try to balance the bias in a data asset, or it can be used just to create enough data to meet a machine learning training requirement. But again, new type of data that's out there and emerging. In the use of data, there's also our standard use. We're familiar with those, right? We need to continue to do regulatory and operational reporting and maintain that as we normally would in data governance. And like some data. Like the data that we knew, there's also uses that are changing too. So business intelligence, that's a familiar use of data in the data estate, but it's changing, it's augmented now. It can be augmented with third-party data assets. It can be augmented with other things that we'll talk about in a little bit later. And the enterprise are using custom AI and machine learning models more and more. So those were always kind of used as well, but now they're proliferating as well to develop new solutions in their enterprises. And so the emerging use of data is in these new technologies is another big aspect. So in Gen AI, large language models, it's reliant on unstructured content and information. And so that's new. Fairly new for enterprises to think about. The other use is RAG, so retrieval, augmentation, generation, search capabilities. Think cognitive search here. It's easier to say. Basically, what those emerging technologies or uses are is using data, being able to actually index across data stores within the data estate and access data in those data stores to retrieve enterprise information that would actually augment the current corpus or knowledge base, and that happens in a real-time manner during the prompt interaction with the LLM. So a lot of interesting ways the data is being used there as well. And then the outcomes are changing too. There's an expectation that operational efficiencies, costs, take out costs, speed to insights, that all of that will accelerate as we change the way we use data and the use cases that we have for it. And there's even bigger expectations from the business for digital innovation, like new business models or service models or products and solution that an enterprise needs to develop and begin to use in these new areas of technology. So when you have that much change across this landscape, there's significant risk that's getting driven into the data estate. So if you could go to the next slide. So the emerging technologies like Gen AI, GPT, and MRAG, data proliferation across third-party data, and evolving global regulation is driving the need for modernization across governance and the data governance estate. So the risk associated with those are all interesting and emerging risks that some of them we've seen before, some of them we haven't. When you think about the technology area here, especially around Gen AI and cognitive search, there are custom corpuses, knowledge bases that are subject to versioning and approval and stale content. So we have these knowledge bases that are unstructured. Keep in mind, these mostly are unstructured knowledge bases that they're using to train these. or to search them. And so there's a huge risk that, you know, unless you've really managed your unstructured data very well, that you don't have the right version, that it's incomplete. If it's incomplete, you can get hallucinations within the actual technology. That means it basically just gives you the wrong answer. And that's not the only driver for hallucinations, is an incomplete knowledge base, but that is one of them. It's difficult to see in. It's a black box, as Bob mentioned. So it complicates the understanding. We don't know where the data came from. And then it can magnify, as Bob also mentioned, especially for the search capabilities, it can magnify access and permissibility controls that we didn't have a good handle on in the first place. As you start indexing all of those data stores and pulling in data, if we didn't have good controls in place for that data as it sits in place, then that gets magnified and can be very risky. So there's considerations that we have to take into account for those technologies. We need new practices and tools, and they have to be extended to unstructured data. Unstructured data is the bomb now, so we got to take it into account. We need to reframe accountability. Accountability is the risk around that, especially now, both legally and reputationally, it is really high. And but we can't. It needs to be reframed so that it's accelerated, that we can get authorizations to use data and understand it quicker than we did before. And then there also needs to be heightened practices so that organizations don't get into this situation where they're exposing data that unknowingly they didn't realize was at risk because of kind of additional technology considerations and not, I won't say poor data controls, but data controls weren't in place because we didn't understand these technologies were going to be there. So identifying those and making sure that we address them. In the expanding world of third-party data, there's this proliferation of data and data suppliers. And really need to understand, you know, do I have a reputable data supplier? What is the provenance of that data? Can I buy it? Are they allowed to sell it? What's going on with this data? Is there inherent bias in it? And then contractually, what are my obligations to the vendor? Vendors are changing their contractual terms for data that they're licensing to enterprises because they are concerned that their data is going to be used in an enterprise's AI and then exposed some way. So that there's risk there as well. We need new approaches to understanding data quality and assessing those capabilities. And then what we really need is a really robust metadata taxonomy and records to address provenance and some of these sourcing issues, as well as the contractual usage obligations and permissions that we have on the data. And the last thing is we all know this is you know, right up there, the changing face of regulation. So responsible AI is getting embedded everywhere, and we need new controls, new tools, new processes to deal with, to manage that. So next slide. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, great. So there are 3 areas here that are really the high priority considerations, and I'm going to have to go through this. I think we're running out of time. Get through this a little more quickly. And these 3 considerations are really what's driving a new governance approach. And they're compliance. Again, we just heard about compliance and regulatory compliance, contractual compliance, and then this just idea of responsible use, right? And the management of structured and unstructured data in the context of AI technologies is really driving changes in data governance and rethinking how we do that. So new regulations mandating the limited use of data and technologies. The focus on responsible use requires an enterprise to provide data based on permissible access, right? And with particular attention to IP protections, and the new use cases for structured and especially unstructured data in AI. It demands attention to quality, transparency, and integrity. So So what does an enterprise do? They need to remain focused on the objective. And so bringing that framework that you have front and center, ensuring that the framework maps to what you're doing and reframing your data governance principles is important. And you need to establish that the responsible AI processes in your organization are steeped in the framework that you have and the principles that you have. So, and after you've done that, organizations need to start building automated AI-enabled, where it's available, capabilities. And here's a list of capabilities that I'll go through quickly to that are important capabilities in this new world where we're trying to govern AI, and not only govern it, but provide trusted data to these accelerated capabilities that people are just clamoring to get to. So the first thing is classification and taxonomy. Now, those are standards, but those are really important standards. And to be able to do any of these other capabilities that you have here, you need to have a classification standard and a taxonomy standard. And many organizations do, but a lot of times that classification and taxonomy is happening manually. So the very next thing that's critical is a data discovery and automated data discovery and tagging tool. Being able to then, once you've discovered it and classified it and tagged it, being able to de-identify it and obfuscate it at the point of use, at the point of accessing the data, not, kind of behind the scenes, but when you're actually going to use it. And you'll need to be able to do that based on your usage and permissibility controls that you also need to understand about your data through your classification. Data quality validation and version control, right up next to say, is this good data? And do I have the freshest copies of this data? And that's not just around structured data, but unstructured data as well. Bias detection is really important. There are automated ways to do bias detection now. Detecting bias is important, and then recording what that bias is. Just because there's bias in an asset doesn't mean that there isn't a valid use case for that asset. And all of that information that you're gathering here through these automated tools needs to be cataloged in a business data catalog. It's more than a technical data catalog, and kind of the business meta rules or business rules and definitions that we had in traditional data catalogs. This really is a marketplace where users can go and they can see all of the information around the bias, the usage, the permissibilities, all of the tagging that's happened there, the quality levels of that, and then make a decision about is this asset fit for purpose for them. So that's really important, that all this information is, when it's collected, is available to the data scientist. There needs to be a way to monitor data in real time as it changes in data stores that have been indexed by cognitive search engines. Is there data that got put in there that shouldn't be there, right? How do we monitor that? And then this last part is prompt and corpus and content, so unstructured data management as well. So those are all automated, hopefully AI-enabled capabilities that, when put together, can really enable the enterprise. So if you can reframe data governance to focus on the ethical principles and include automated capabilities, the enterprise will be able to support the demand for new and valuable AI technologies with trusted data underneath. So the last slide I have is okay, so if I have all these capabilities, how do I practically apply those? Here are kind of the three hottest, I think, opportunities that enterprises have and they're pressing, that drive significant value, but they also drive risk that can be mitigated by these new and accelerated governance capabilities. So cognitive search, we just talked about that one a little bit. Then the actual Gen AI and using Gen AI internally to solve internal specific business problems and needs, and data sharing as well. Those all drive risk, and we've talked about the cognitive search ones, outdated information, disclosure, IP considerations, the capabilities there on the right, unstructured data discovery important, classifying and tagging automatically, monitoring to see if things drift in to the search data stores that shouldn't be there, and understanding permissibility and use at the time that the data is consumed. So at the time that the cognitive search is consuming the data, understanding those permissions then. And then in these large language models, there's risk of hallucination and using corpuses that are not bounded or aligned to the business requirement. So understanding what's in that corpus and when we make it available to other solutions, potential solutions, is important. And then the lack of an information lifecycle management on structured data and how we do that. So version control important, and then the management of corpus and prompts. And last is data sharing. Data sharing is so important, and it's sharing trusted data, right? The risk is that there's a lack of availability, and that lack of availability can be driven by risk aversion. So worried about all of this risk that we've talked about and don't have ways to mitigate those through capabilities. So that's and that could also just be from infrastructure as well. But data can have undetected bias or unknown provenance. And again, the business data catalog here, really important. This marketplace where people can go and see what's there, obfuscating at the time of using the data. So placing that obfuscation at the time of access to the data, monitoring it to make sure that it's consistent with the standards and quality rules that you have, and then detecting bias. So, I think that the bottom line here is the data state is changing, and data governance practice need to change with it and reframe to support this kind of accelerated demand for trusted data. By keeping focused on those ethical principles and establishing those new capabilities, enterprises will be able to keep up with the pace of AI technologies. So with that, I think I know I kind of went quickly through the last, but I wanted to make sure we had time for questions. So I think if there are any questions, yeah, we're ready for those.
If you have any questions, you guys can type it in the chat, or you can just take yourself off mute and ask.
I'll give it a go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
In your opinion, what is maybe the #1 ethical concern that we need to address now from AI?
So I think the #1 ethical concern is reliability, right? So what we're seeing right now is because of the nature of generative AI technologies and not being able to see in them, we don't know whether what comes out of those out of those responses to prompts are accurate. So that reliability, to know that you have accuracy, that it's the right answer, it's not a hallucinated answer, and that you can get the same answer every time, is a real concern for businesses, right? So you have a tool that you can use, but there's checking, right? There's accountability, a human in the loop that really needs to validate that. And oftentimes it's difficult to validate something that's not true because you can't find it anywhere, right? So could you just not find it, or is it really not valid? So I think for me, I think those are the two things that the business needs to be focused on.
Yeah. Yeah, let me just add to that. I mean, I think realizing that, I think literacy in the organization is so critical. And let me give you an example. I was teaching a course yesterday, and there was a lot of senior executives in the room, and I said, "How are you using ChatGPT?" And what popped up was, "Well, I use it for research, I use it for content, and I was like, well, do you realize the LLM, the open source LLM that you're using, is like 1 to 2 years stale at minimum in terms of content. And so if you're using this to drive business decisions, again, it depends on what you're using it for trying to figure out something personally, that's fine. But if you're trying to use it in a business context, you know, that's probably not the best use. You want to use that large language model for the language capability and point it at your custom corpus, the one that's behind your firewall that has your content that's curated. That's so just understanding the differences and understanding how you should use it, how you shouldn't use it. That helps mitigate some of the you know, integrity and you know, concerns that Gwen's talking about.
Hi, nice session. This is Rich Diaz. You mentioned literacy, and that's certainly one of the things that interests me because of talent. And obviously the lack of talent in the marketplace and the folks that we go out and hire. But from our business perspective, how do they go hand in hand from your perspective? Do you think talent coming into an organization now requires a very strong literacy on AI as like a must-have? Is that top of mind for a lot of organizations out there?
I'll start. And so I think literacy, so talent coming in, I mean, that's great if you can get people with a starter kit and a background in AI. But if you think about an organization, you know, those are onesies, twosies compared to the vast majority of people that are already there. You're not talking about educating the IT department, right? You're talking about educating everyone else that's going to be using this stuff on a daily basis to rethink their business model, rethink how they're getting work done, whether it be a memo or something a little more substantial in the form of an agent that they use in their work. And so I think the focus needs to be at many different levels. I think you got to kind of take a persona-based view of your organization, and I tend to look at things in three chunks. I'm not saying these will work for your organization, but I think of coders, clickers, and consumers. And the consumers obviously are the more senior level executives and people that are using the chat type interface or the end products. The clickers are the people in the middle that are the analysts that, you know, they're not data scientists, they're not in there coding, but they are, or the software engineers, but they're the people that are in the business that are trying to connect data sources together and technologies together, and they're going to have a different set of literacy needs. And then the coders, of course, you know, when it comes to, you know, the data estate itself in terms of, you know, how quickly that's expanding and whatnot, they're going to have a different set of needs as well. So I think you got to kind of, you know, lay out that whole, your literacy approach along those lines. Hopefully that was helpful. And Gwen, do you have anything you'd add on that?
No, I thought it's comprehensive. I did want to address there's a question in the chat, so I want to do that really quickly, and I know we have a hand up too. So what we're seeing is what we typically see in regulation between North America and European regulations. European regulations are, of course, much more stringent. North America keeps an eye on those and tries to figure out where the line is for them and how they need to manage that. But I think what's interesting about regulation that I've seen with AI regulation is they're regulating the use case itself. So not just the data. So when we think of GDPR, we think about the data and the data availability and that sort of thing and giving permissions. But when we look at what the European Union is coming out with around AI, they're regulating the actual use case. There are certain ways that you can't use AI to do certain business functions. So they have restrictions on, you know, facial recognition and those sorts of things where they're just not going to allow that because they don't trust it. So I think that is an interesting kind of development around regulation out of Europe. So
yeah, and innovative things like thinking about the conversation around watermarks and things like that. So if you AI generated image, do you need to watermark it? You know, those types of discussions are you know, being had much more aggressively than we've been having them in the US.
So Greg, you had a question?
Yes. I just want to say thank you so much for your guys' time and intel. I think it's really, really valuable. But really quickly, what can I do to be better prepared for the AI wave that's coming, that is here?
And it just give me some context, Greg, on your role, because I think it depends, right?
Okay. So for example, so right now I'm striving to be a PM. I'm currently leading a couple of internal initiatives, but we have been, I guess you could say, we have been not promoted, but we have been given the green light to kind of explore and
Yep.
mess around and play with the
Good.
ChatGPT. But besides that, like, what else can I do? Should I take some like AI coding courses on the side, or?
What I think there is. So I mentioned literacy, the importance of literacy. So I'd say you're probably more in the consumer clicker kind of realm there. So I think you need to understand the basics of and the limitations of Gen AI and how it works, how it uses data, what some of the limitations I talked about using it for research, and some of the limitations there being stale. Gwen talked about the potential for hallucination, so the basic understandings of that. Then I think you progress into prompts. And I think you need to start understanding, okay, well, how I ask the question can be very high level and cursory and prone to hallucination or a bad outcome, not necessarily hallucination, versus is that something that's wrong, right? That isn't what you want, versus a very detailed prompt that can get you a very good answer, a very usable answer. And then the understanding of like, how do I validate that? Like, how do I really understand if this is good or not? And then the next thing you can do is start to progress into, well, how does this change the way I do my work? So, and how do I need to be thinking about, like, in a PM perspective, there's a lot of things that are repetitive that you guys would do. You could use agents, but you got to break things down and to say, well, okay, what are those use cases? How do I need to be thinking about the data that goes into those use cases? What quality of data do I need? Can I just point it at a team site and suck up a bunch of documents? Well, you're probably going to get a lot of, redundant data with versioning issues. That's going to get you, that's all input, right? Garbage in, garbage out. You got to think about the impact of that on how the agent works and the types of output it gives you. And then you got to think about IP, and we mentioned that in the risks. And IP is really, really important, because at the end of the day, everyone's going to have this open AI, right? This Gen AI model. What's going to be different about you and your organization is the IP that you use, that the agent uses with the large language model and your data. So those are going to be the things that create competitive advantage. And so you got to start thinking about that. And I think the problem today is we mesh our IP, the things that are unique, whether it be a classification scheme or a type of output or just base level information and data. We mesh all that together in just how we do our work day to day. And we've got to start drawing boxes around that and ensure that that is maintained over time and thought of as a competitive weapon. Because it is ultimately when it gets paired with these LLMs. So hopefully that was
yes, for sure. Thank you so much. And
so I'll just jump in there real quick. So Greg, as the PM, you set the tone, right? And so, coming from the ethical principles, that's the tone you need to set, right? You need to, I think that's important to understand what those are and make sure that if you have anything to do with resourcing, you've got, a variety of people in the loop and that you understand kind of the ethics around all those components, because as a PM, you can drive that, so.
No, for sure. And You know, somebody says really quickly, because I know we're over time, but somebody said, you know, some ChatGPT has been created. Now, who's going to create the dark version of ChatGPT? And I'm just like, AI is about to change. It's changing everything. So I'm curious to see what the future is going to hold, given that, you know, it's really powerful. But then on the other spectrum, we have bad actors who are, well, copyright this law.
It's all about the data, right? So the LLM understands connections between words and meaning, and that is not good or bad. But then you can point that at different corpuses.
Yeah.
An open public corpus is going to have racist comments. It's going to have lots of things that it sucks in, and you can point it at very nefarious stuff, and you can point it at your own company's data, and it be, you know, perfectly fine and give you good information, good results. So yes, there will be bad data sets out there and bad corpuses, and the tools. Hopefully, you know, they tend to trail some of this innovation, but the tools, you know, the innovation is so fast. It'll also be good on the control side too. We just have to be open and aware and realize some of the stuff. And the challenge is it's harder to determine, you know, when something is bad or wrong or from a source that isn't trusted. And Gwen mentioned the need for checking provenance on our data. That is going to be incredibly important as well. So, sorry, Gwen, anything else?
No, I think you hit it all.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm not sure if Omar is still. Oh, anyone else?
No, I think that's it.
Still
No one
here.
has anything else to say. Omar?
Still here, Bob and Gwen. What a great conversation. Thank you for everybody who participated. Just really excited. An incredibly important topic. Thank you so much to KPMG for participating with us on this. And I think this is not the end of this, right? Like there's so much more. This is really early days in the world of AI and Gen AI. So Bob and Gwen, looking forward to continuing this conversation.
We love the partnership. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.